This is Colin Thompson interviewing Jolene Hendrix on the 29th of January. So, to start with, could you give me your full name and date of birth?
Jolene Hendrix, June 13th, 1968.
So, I understand that you sent quite a lot of packages to soldiers and sailors.
Yeah, I would say I did. My husband was in Desert Storm, and we started dating in 1990, just before that conflict started. So during that time, and then whenever he was on a longer deployment through 92 when he got out of the Navy. And then he went back into the Army after 9/11. He entered service in 2003 and had some long deployments then. And so, yes, we sent quite a few packages during that time.
So, about how often would you say that you sent things?
I would say that normally tried to send something every 2 weeks, roughly, unless there was a holiday, so then I'd send a normal package, and then there'd be a holiday package as well for like Christmas, Valentine's Day, that type of thing, or if it was his birthday, to make it more special.
What sort of things would you include in these packages?
Well, it kind of depended on where he was at and the time of year. When he was in the Navy, because they had the ship store, he didn't need as much in the way of toiletries or snack stuff. So I was concentrating more on, special fun things, so it was more interested, or maybe baked goods, because back then it seemed like they did a better job of getting them to the ship faster. Plus, because there was more climate control, things would stay fresher once they got to him. When he was in the desert in Afghanistan, it was a lot of baby wipes, eye drops, hard candy, M&Ms. You never sent chocolate that could melt, and M&Ms with that shell would travel well. So it was a lot more toiletry type things, and then we tried to send some fun stuff as well, so that there'd be something interesting in there, so it just kind of varied by what I could find in the stores and what I thought would travel well.
So how would sending mail and packages work?
As far as what?
Like to send something to somebody overseas. Was there a special process, or?
You always sent it priority mail because, well, for one thing, back then at least, when he was in the Navy, I don't think this was an issue, but when he was in the Army, they had priority mail. They had military priority mail boxes. So they were a large box for less than the regular priority mail price. And then it was guaranteed that it got to the military faster. And then from there on, you never knew how long it would take. But we always used those priority mail boxes because they were cheaper, and stuffed them to the brim. You made sure that you had plenty of stuff in there, and if there was anything fragile, then you bought more stuff that was soft that you would use as packaging material rather than waste space on paper.
Okay. So what were some of the costs involved in sending packages?
I think that at least when he was in the Army, it was probably like $12 or $14 to ship off a box. And then, of course, it just depended on what we were putting in it at the time. But I guess any box could range in price from maybe $30 to $50, depending on what I was sending to him at that time.
Okay. And did you typically include letters in the packages, or?
Maybe a quick note, but when he was in the Navy, yeah, I did include a letter. Because we didn't have internet or anything back then. When he was in Afghanistan, starting, I think the first time he went over was 2006, the beginning of 2007. He had access to a phone, so once a week he would call, and he would email almost every day. So I wouldn't send a letter in with the box, because he already had all that information. So it might just be a card.
Okay. So when you sent letters in the mail, would they have been typically handwritten, or you have typed and printed them?
Oh, they were always handwritten. Always.
Okay. Did you ever send any packages to strangers?
Well, yes. I was the FRG leader, and FRG is a family readiness group with the Army. And we worked on a project where, all right, let me back up. My husband was a company commander in the Army, and so he had all his soldiers, plus he had some sailors. I believe there was some Air Force airmen. And then they had their civilians that were all attached to them, and they were a variety of forward operating bases. So I'm not sure how many places, but I think well over a dozen different, what they call FOBs, forward operating bases. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody would get something for the holidays in particular. So we sent boxes with stockings. So they had their Christmas stocking plus all the stocking stuffers. And I sent for them, and then I arranged that other people like family and friends and other people associated with the FRG would send them as well, so that anybody that was associated with our unit would get things for Christmas, Valentine's Day, other holidays, because some people got nothing from their families. So we wanted to make sure nobody was forgotten.
And do you have an estimate as to about how often you would arrange these sorts of packages?
Well, we sent off a lot of stuff ahead of time to help cut down on the shipping cost. So they had a big Connex, a big metal container that was going over, and they allotted us room in there so that some of the heavier things like shampoo and body wash and that type of thing were covered. I think the only one that I arranged was the Christmas one, because my husband came out of theater in November when another commander took his place. They always relieve commanders partway through so that more people have experience as commanders during a deployment. So that was the only holiday that occurred during my time.
Okay. So did you ever receive any sort of letters back from your soldier or any of the strangers that were sent to you?
Did my husband ever write me?
Specifically, like regarding the packages?
Regarding the packages? Yeah, I got one or two letters and emails from soldiers thanking me for what we had done. So, but just a few. Most of them, they didn't know me, or there's also a little bit of a divide between enlisted and officers, and so they wanted to be maybe a little bit careful with how they interacted with a spouse. So after the fact, when they were home, I'd hear from them if we were at a meeting and they wanted to visit, or we had some injured soldiers that came back right about the time that my husband came home. And so I had a lot of contact with them. And then I'd also hear from some of the families that were thankful that we were doing those care packages for all the soldiers.
Okay. So would you say that the proliferation of phones is helping or hurting the these sorts of care package efforts?
I wouldn't say that the phones are hurting it at all, because they still need these creature comforts, and their family and friends still want to give them something from home. So, and there's a lot of things. I'm not sure how things have changed in the time since my husband's retired, but it used to be, that there was quite a bit of stuff that they couldn't get. The supply chain didn't work really well in Afghanistan a lot of the time. So it was really necessary for us to send those care packages, because otherwise they wouldn't have those toiletries in some of those remote locations.
Were there any situations where you were aware of either letters or packages getting lost in the mail?
No, there were times where they took an extended period of time to get there, and usually that was because of weather, or one time because someone on the carrier got upset with someone on my husband's ship, and for 4 weeks, no packages, no mail whatsoever left the carrier to go to the ship. When he was in Afghanistan, like I said, weather could be an issue, but it was also care packages came second to the mission. So if they needed space for necessary supplies or for soldiers on a helo, that came first. They had to make sure that their manning was taken care of first. And then I would say probably a pretty close second was the care packages, because the leaders understood that these were a huge morale booster, and if they weren't getting to the soldiers, then it was going to have a direct impact on how things would go for them within the war efforts.
Okay. So, in your experience, did you or the organization you were working with reduce the frequency of care packages sent as the conflict lasted longer?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. It was always a priority to make sure that these were going out and that people were taken care of. And I would say that as things dragged out, we were more resolved to make sure that they were going out on a regular basis, because we understood how hard it was for the soldiers to be gone that long and be under that kind of stress for such a long period of time. Like, my husband was deployed for 16 months with a 3-week R&R period for that entire time. So sending those packages right up to the end when they said that they wouldn't arrive before they came home, that was a priority.
Okay. So, in terms of from an organizational perspective, how would the funds be collected to?
Well, technically, we were very limited on what we could send through the organization, because the FRG is actually meant for the family and not for the soldiers. So we could do a little bit, but not much. So a lot of it was donations, actually. And otherwise, we could get in trouble because we weren't using our funds appropriately. Because actually in the Army, at least, there's 2 different organizations. There's the FRG, the Family Readiness Group, which is supposed to support the families, though the soldiers are always invited, the single soldiers are always invited to any event. But then there's BOSS, Better Opportunities for Single Soldiers, and that's specifically for the soldiers who are unmarried and make sure that they're out and doing activities that keep them busy and maybe are a bit more wholesome than what they would do on their own as a group. But in both cases, care packages doesn't fall under their purview.
Okay, I see. So, if you were to put together a package to send now, what sort of things would you include?
Well, that would completely depend on where he would be at and what he would need. So if he was in Afghanistan again, it would be, and things hadn't changed since he was there last time, again, it would be baby wipes. It would be maybe puzzle books. It would be eye drops, gum, candy. I would be making cookies, some type of cookie that would stay fresh for quite a while. And fun stuff, always trying to do fun stuff so that it was a bit more exciting. But like I said, it would depend. He would be stationed over in Japan. I wouldn't send most of that stuff. I would be sending him the baked goods, but he would be able to get almost anything there. So I wouldn't concentrate on toiletries.
And at least in your experience with the other members of the the FRG, were you aware of any situations where somebody had attempted to send something that wasn't necessarily supposed to be sent?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially over in Afghanistan. We were told that we had to be very careful not to offend the Muslims. So we weren't supposed to send any pork products whatsoever. So if you were sending jerky, you wanted to make sure it was all beef jerky or turkey jerky or something like that. Better to keep it in the bag so that it was very clear that there was no pork in it. You couldn't send the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition or anything like that that showed too much skin, because that was offensive. That was really it, though. If you stayed away from pork or things that were too revealing, I would say those were the two things. And one unit we were with was very good about disseminating all this information so that we knew exactly what we could send and what we couldn't send, and all the families were clued in. But then we were in another group that they didn't include any of that information. And it's only for the fact that I had been with the 82nd Airborne as a spouse that I knew that we couldn't do any of that. So as we're sitting in this briefing prior to the deployment, and they're telling us what we can mail, when we can mail, and what the addresses are, I kept kind of raising my hand and saying, well, what about this and what about that? And it was only then that they were passing on that information to the newer families that had no idea. This was the first deployment that some of these spouses and parents were dealing with, and they didn't know that there were any significant restrictions.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that, those sorts of meetings you were referencing there?
Usually before deployment, the commander and FRG leaders are volunteers, but then we would have a paid person who was a Department of the Army civilian that would oversee us. And so they were supposed to get all that information to us. So prior to the deployment, we would have a meeting that was with the commander of the either battalion or brigade, and usually that person that oversaw the FRG, maybe a couple other people that would come in, and they would explain, give us a better idea of when they'd be leaving, when they should be in country. We would talk about OPSEC, operational security, what you can say, where you can say it. They would give us an idea of what we could mail and when, and resources for the families to help get them through the deployment. So that was very important, having hands to hold, basically.
Okay. So is there anything else that's come to mind that you wanted to talk about that maybe I haven't covered?
No, not really. I think that in some ways care packages haven't changed a lot through the years, as far as, we need to send razors, we need to send their favorite body wash, we need to send bug spray, whatever the case is. I think that what has changed is that we're more sensitive or more limited in what we can send depending on where our service members are, where that wasn't necessarily an issue maybe back World War II, Vietnam, Korea. I don't think that there were the limitations that sometimes are being imposed, and yet there's so many more things that we can send nowadays that those generations wouldn't have had.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed.
Thank you.